Well, good morning. I don't usually start off with announcements when I preach, but I would be, I think, derelict if I did not begin by telling you how thankful that we are to be here. I told them in the Bible class this morning, I don't know how excited you are that we're here. I have an inkling, though, in the love that you've shown us. But I know for a fact that there is a group of people that is very excited that we are here. And they're right here. And that's because three little boys are mixed in between them now. And we're 30 minutes from them rather than 20 hours away from them. And it's good for us to be home, back here in Northwest Tennessee, and here where we feel like we belong. Thank you for all the things that you've done to make us feel at home here already. The love that you've shown us and the kindness that you've shown us has been overwhelming. All the notes and the cards, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through today, has meant so much to us. And everything that you've done to extend hospitality to us has meant so very much to us. We're grateful to be here. And it's in the article that is on the front page of the bulletin this morning, but I'll tell you face to face that we're not only honored and very humbled to be here, thankful to God to have this opportunity here to work with you and be a part of the Eastwood family. But I'm extremely proud to be your preacher. And I look forward to getting to know you. I look forward to you getting to know my family. I know you're going to love Melody and Garrett and Gordon Gannon as much as I do. They're literally the best part of me. And I keep telling Melody they really wanted you, but they had to hire me to get you is the only thing. And I believe that. But we're so very grateful to be here. And I'm thankful that my parents are here. My Melody's parents are here. My brother and his wife and family here. Aunts and uncles and cousins. And it means a lot to us that you're here to share this wonderful day with us as well. We hope that you'll be back. If you're visiting with us, we hope that you'll come and visit with us again. That you'll be here this evening. Tonight we're going to look at a text from Acts chapter 10 when Peter was called to come to Cornelius' house and preach. And one of the first questions that he asked is, why did you send for me? Well, as we begin our work together, that's the question that we're going to ask and answer this evening. And we hope you'll be back and worship and study with us tonight as well. For this morning, we're going to begin by looking at a few things that I think are extremely important to try to start off right with. And I appreciate the great job Blake did in reading our text for us this morning. If you are a fan of sports, or at least a fan of baseball, you'll probably recognize the guy that's on the screen above me right now. That's Lou Gehrig, the pride of the Yankees, also known as the Iron Horse. And he was known as the Iron Horse because among the many accomplishments in his storied career as the first baseman for the New York Yankees, one of the things that he's most well known for is the number of games that he played consecutively, 2,130 baseball games without missing a one. 2,130 games. A record that would stand for over a half a century until Cal Ripken would eventually break it. And what's most ironic, at least, if not kind of sad about that record, is the fact that if you don't know Lou Gehrig because you care nothing about sports, you don't care anything about baseball, you've probably heard of his name because of ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. A disease that cut his career short, a debilitating disease that cut his health short, and ultimately cut his life short. And a nation that loved and admired and respected him mourned the fact that he was put in this situation. The sorrow and the empathy and sympathy where people reached out to him was very overwhelming for he and his family. And it was that on July 4th of 1939, he stood in front of 60,000 people at Yankee Stadium and gave what is one of the more well-known speeches in this nation's history, especially if you think about it from a sporting context, in which he acknowledged the fact that all of these people that were in the crowd, 60,000 there and untold multitudes that had turned to the radio dial to listen to this speech, He mentioned the fact that I know you've heard the bad break that's been dealt to me. And he appreciated, of course, the sorrow that they felt for him. But then he uttered the most familiar line of that speech, certainly, and maybe one of the most familiar lines in all of sports speeches. And that is, today I consider myself to be the luckiest man on earth. Even though his health was shrinking, even though his career was no longer, even though he was ultimately going to be killed a few short years after, he said, I consider myself to be the luckiest man on earth. And in that speech, he detailed several reasons why that he felt he was the luckiest man on earth. For example, one of the reasons he gave was because he said, I have a mother-in-law that takes my side when I squabble with my wife. I don't know how that feels, but I'm guessing that would make you feel good. But one of the reasons why he said he was the luckiest man on earth, he motioned to his teammates from the New York Yankees. And I'm going to read the quote that he gave. He says, look at these grand men. Which of you wouldn't consider it the highlight of his career to associate with them for even one day? Because I get to be with them, he said, I'm the luckiest man on earth. I wonder if we feel that way in the church, about the church. You know, when we were at Denver, my wife hates me to tell this story, so we'll just start off with a bang today. How about that? We were in Denver, and we're sitting in the house. I'm in my recliner reading. The doorbell rings. Melody's chair's closer to the foyer, so she gets up, goes to the door. It's the UPS man, and I'm reading and halfway listening to what they're talking about, and they do the thing where, you know, sign here, and here's your package or whatever. And the last thing he says to her that really made me catch what he said was, I like that southern accent of yours. It's real cute. Well, that recliner popped up, and I bowed up as big as I could get, you know, and and Melody said, he's already gone. And I said, I want him to know there's a man that lives here, you know. But then it made me think, when was the last time that I had told her that she was cute? Have you ever heard someone in your presence talking about your husband? How talented he is, how handsome he is, how nice he is? Or your wife, how pretty she is, how sweet she is, how talented she is? Or your children, how good hearts they have, how well behaved they are? Your parents, how much they're respected, how much they're loved and liked? And then think, how long has it been since I've said that to my wife? How long has it been since I've said that to my husband or my parents or my children? Do we take them for granted? And do we take each other for granted? See, this morning I'm wanting you to see you the way that I see you. Imagine, guys, if you would, that you've invited someone that you work with over to your house to eat supper, and your wife has worked hard all day long preparing this meal. And no sooner than your guest is done, he pushes his plate back and he said, well, I got to tell you, that chicken was dry, tough as leather. Those mashed potatoes were soupy. That dessert was awful. Your wife's not much of a housekeeper. If you're like me, it wouldn't take you very long to firmly show that man to the door, would it? But how many times do we come to sup with the Lord and talk about His bride in the same way? To nitpick the preacher, or to nitpick the elders, or to nitpick the deacons, or did you see what Sister So-and-so had on? Do we take each other for granted? Do we appreciate each other? I want you to know that we love the church at Eastwood. And I know you're thinking, well, this is your first day. How can you really love us? Or you didn't even remember my name this morning. I just told you what it was. Well, I'll admit, I had the elders send me a directory about a month and a half ago because I was going to have all your names memorized by the time we got here. I failed. But I tried. But one thing that I've done, and I've told the elders this, I've stalked you on Facebook, on the bulletins every week, on the website. I've looked and I've tried to figure out who you are. I made a list of all of your names, every family and every individual name. And every morning when I get up, I've prayed for you every morning. And I know you've prayed for me. And that's a great way to start loving people. But I've been overwhelmed at the love that you've shown us. And already, I can tell you why I love this church. And that's what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes. You know, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, as Paul begins this letter to the church at Thessalonica, a church whom he loved, and he's going to say that later on in the letter. As he begins that letter, he talks about the prayer that he's been offering on their behalf and how thankful that he was for them. He's thankful for them because, number one, God called them, and we could talk all day about how that God calls us through the gospel, and we accept that call by rendering obedience to Him and accepting the grace that He's offered through the plan of salvation. But that's why he thought so much of them and was thankful for them. Also because, as you get on down into verse 4, because God loved them. And in the middle of that, he talks about 3 reasons why that he was thankful for them, 3 reasons why God loved them, and 3 reasons why he was thankful for the church at Thessalonica. And I believe they're just as fine 3 attributes as we could talk about today of why I love this church at Eastwood. And so for the next few minutes, let's talk about those 3. First of all, if you notice in verse 3 of our text here, he says, as he's talking about his thankfulness for them, he says, I'm thankful for your work of faith. I'm thankful for your work of thanks. That's what he was giving thanks for without ceasing, was because of their work of faith. That is, it was a work that was motivated by their faith. See, they didn't have the passive kind of faith, the kind of faith that James talks about in James 2, when those people that were claiming to have faith in the Lord but weren't doing anything with that faith, and he says that kind of faith is dead. That's not what they had. On the other end of the spectrum, they didn't have those works that weren't motivated by faith. You know, in Philippians chapter 1, Paul dealt with that. He talked about those who were preaching the gospel. They were doing the right works, doing the right things, but they were doing it for the wrong motivation. It was not because of their faith. It was because they were trying to hurt Paul. They were trying to undermine him, trying to make him feel bad. No, when he talks about the church at Thessalonica, he said, I'm thankful, I love you because you have a work of faith that go hand in hand. You're working because of your faith. And when you stop and look how these words are used throughout this passage, throughout this letter really, it helps give us some insight about what he's really talking about when he talks about a work of faith. For example, if you turn over to the last chapter of this letter, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, when we're talking about that work, he uses it there in chapter 5, verses 11 through 13, when he's talking about the elders of the congregation. And he says of them that they were to esteem them very highly in love for their works' sake. That's the same word. See, those elders, those shepherds, those men who were the leaders of the congregation, they were to esteem them highly because of what they had been doing for them. The care that they had given, the protection they had given, the feeding they had given to them. He said you should esteem them highly for that work. And then you talk about this faith. If you flip back a page or two to chapter 3, in chapter 3, verses 1 through 10 of 1 Thessalonians, you really find out a lot about the background of why this letter was written. You see, Paul and Silas, or Silvanus as it says in verse 1 of chapter 1, Timotheus or Timothy, Paul, Silas, and Timothy had gone to Thessalonica and preached the gospel for the first time. The church was established, but they no more got it up and going, and the persecution began, and they were run out of town. And they didn't know what the condition of the church in Thessalonica was anymore. They were worried whether or not they were still faithful. And so if you look here, and we'll just skip around a little bit, in verse 10, he says that's the reason why that we sent Timothy, our brother and minister of God, and our fellow laborer in the gospel of Christ, to establish you and encourage you concerning your faith. Jump on down to verse 5. He said, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter had tempted you, and our labor might be in vain. See, we sent Timothy because we were worried about your faith, whether you were still faithful to the Lord. But then you notice in verse 6, he says that Timothy has come to us from you and brought us good news of your faith and love. Verse 7, because of that good news, he says, we were comforted by your faith. See, that's what motivated their sending Timothy, and that's why he's writing this letter, is because we're so glad, we're so proud, we're so happy that you're still doing work because of your faith. And when you think about it, that's the reason why we love this church. Paul loved the church in Thessalonica because of their work of faith. We love the church at Eastwood because of your work of faith. You know, think about the elders here. I don't know if you know, I'm sure you do, but how much care that they give for this congregation. You know, through the process of getting to know them and the meetings that we had, the phone calls that we had, the text messages that Charlie and I sent back and forth, I'll admit some of them were about Tennessee football, but a lot of them were about you. And how concerned they were for your sake. What they wanted more than anything was they wanted to make the right choice for this congregation. They wanted to make sure that you were fed properly. They wanted to make sure that the guy that they got was not going to teach you the wrong thing. So one of the things they did is they gave me a 9-page questionnaire to fill out. I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm saying that as a compliment. Because they cared what I think. Not because my opinion matters. They want to make sure that I'm where the Bible is. See? Why did they do that? Because of you. See? And I got to tell you this morning, as we met together to begin this working together, you know, the very first thing that happened in that room was they prayed. Your elders prayed for you. And I'm sure that's not something that just happened this morning because I was in the room. When I think about their work, it makes me thankful for this congregation. It makes me love this congregation. When I think about that faithfulness that he talks about here, that continuing to keep on keeping on, doing things because of your faith in the Lord and wanting to serve Him. I think about a man like Herman Jackson that walked up to me the other night, Wednesday night, and shook my hand and told me about all the years that he has served the Lord's church here and how even though he's been a Christian longer than many of us in this room been alive, why is he still doing the things he's doing? He's motivated by his faith in the Lord. Paul loved the church at Thessalonica because of their work of faith, and I love the church at Eastwood because of your work of faith. Secondly, if you notice back in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 3, Paul loved the church at Thessalonica because of their labor of love. Their labor of love. The things that they were doing was because of their faith, but also they were laboring because of their love for each other, their love for the Lord, their love for their fellow man. That's what motivated them to do the things that they were doing. And you see that in the way that those two words are used throughout this letter. If you turn over to chapter 2 and verse 9, you see it. Chapter 3 and verse 5, even a better example of that word laboring used as Paul writes to them. He says, "For you remember, brethren, our labor and toil." For laboring night and day. And that who he's talking about here is he and Silas and Timothy. Laboring night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you, we preach to you the gospel of God. It was their labor as preachers. Their teaching and preaching the gospel of Christ is the labor that he's talking about. That was motivated by love. Why did they come there and preach the gospel to begin with? Because they loved the souls of those men. Why had they continued that congregation to reach out to their community and share the gospel of Christ? Because of their love. And then you think about that word love and how that it's used there. If you jump back to 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 again, notice in verse 11, after he talks about how that we were worried about your faithfulness, that's why we sent Timothy to check on you. He brought us back, how that you were very faithful still. Notice what he says in verse 11. He says, "Now may our God and Father Himself and our Lord Jesus Christ direct our way to you, and may the Lord make you increase and abound." See, it's not something they didn't have. They already had, but it's something they could always have more of. He says, may you increase and abound in love for one another and for all men. See, that labor of love is why he loved the church at Thessalonica. And when I think about that labor of love, that's a great reason why we're thankful for the church here at Eastwood. You know, one of the things that was hardest for our oldest, Garrett, in our choosing to move from Denver back here, he was glad to see family. He liked the idea of getting back to rural life. But he's 13 now. And he's just gotten involved in the youth group out there at Bear Valley. And as a teenager, made close friends that he was very attached to. And one of the things that made it easier is when we came here and he saw the great work that Adam's been doing with the youth group here. That's the kind of labor he's talking about here. When he saw that not only do they have a Teens in the Word, is what we call it out there, on Tuesday nights, the teens get together and study. Guess what? The teens here get together at Adam's house and study. We talked about how all the teens sit together at Bear Valley up front. At Eastwood, they all sit together up front. Why? Because of Adam's diligent labor. And the reason why the youth group is strong there and here is because of men like Adam that are willing to labor in their ministry. I think about guys like Victor and Bobby and all the men. One of the things that was mentioned to me the other night was all of the great men that have stood in this pulpit and preached the gospel. That's why I keep doing this. I feel like I'm on the Opry stage, and there's that one spot. I don't need to really stand there, but all the great men that have worked and labored here to preach and teach the gospel to you, to this congregation, and to this community. And when I think about love, I think again about all the many ways that you've shown your love to us in just such a short time. Miss Gail Dodd has sent me I don't know how many messages on Facebook. We're excited for you to get here. We can't wait for you to get here. Did she have to do that? No. Why did she do that? Love. We received from Miss Sue Odom a handwritten 3-page letter. Do you know how often you get handwritten letters anymore? And it was all about, we can't wait for you to get here. We're praying for you. We're excited for you. We love you already. Do you know what that meant to me? Maybe best of all, and that's because I'm a little bit selfish, I suppose, but John Davidson sent me a message. And his said, when you get here, you get ready to go duck hunting, you let me know. See, he knows where my love is at, see? Why did those people do that? Why did so many, and I'm just mentioning a few, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings because a lot of you did that kind of stuff. Why do you do those kinds of things? Because of your love. And that's what will make the difference in this community. When people see that love, they want that love. That's what people are missing in their lives. Paul said, I love the church at Thessalonica because your labor of love, and I love the church at Eastwood because of your labor of love. And then thirdly, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 3, he says, I love the church at Thessalonica because of your patience of hope. Your patience of hope. That is, they were willing to continue to be faithful no matter what. That patience or that enduring or that steadfastness, that continuing to do what's right, continuing to be faithful no matter what. And it's all based on that hope that they have. And what's interesting is this is the only time in the book of 1 Thessalonians, the letter of 1 Thessalonians, that word that's translated patience is used. Why? Chapter 3, he found out they had been steadfast or patient, right? So he didn't have to talk about that anymore. But one thing he talks a lot about is their hope. Because their work of faith and their labor of love and even their patience was all built around the hope that they had for something better. You know, the church at Thessalonica faced a lot of persecution. Persecution that would make an individual or a congregation faint or fall. But not them. Why? Because of their hope that Jesus was going to deliver them to something better. And that's why they stayed faithful. Notice what he mentions. Look over in chapter 2 and verse 19. He says, "For what is our hope, or joy, or crown of rejoicing? Is it not even you in the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ at His coming?" See, what gives us hope is knowing that our labor wasn't in vain with you. See, when Jesus comes back and rewards us. In chapter 4 and verse 13, he says, "I hope that you do not hope as those, or sorrow rather, as those who have no hope, but instead understand that you've got something better waiting on you." That hope is not like the birthday wish. You blow out the candle. Well, I hope I get to go to heaven. It's an earnest expectation to receive. It's I know it's there. Not because I've earned it or deserve it, but because He's faithful who's promised. And when I think about the church at Eastwood, I love you because of your patience of hope. That continuing to do what you should over and over and over. And why you do it is because of that reward. One of the first introductions to Eastwood that I can remember is coming up here with Hugh Adams to gospel meetings. Now, it was asked by the elders when we were talking with them, "We've heard you were kin to Hugh Adams." I can neither deny or confirm my kinship to Hugh Adams, okay? Just in case. He's a Mississippi State fan, see? But he talked about how much he loved this congregation because of how faithful you were, how you continued, that patience of keeping on, keeping on. I think about guys like Max Henry that come up here the other day to the church building, and I heard some clanking around, and I found out that he and a lot of the other men have been working hard back over here behind me on the baptistry. We don't have water in the baptistry. Don't let that keep you from coming forward. I think we can find some water somewhere out today. Why are they doing that? Because they're looking for a better reward, aren't they? And on we could give example after example. Paul said, "I love the church at Thessalonica because of your patience of hope." When it comes to patience, I know of no person in this room that's more patient than Miss Lori Backer. I've emailed her and I've Facebook messaged her and I've pestered her to death. How do we do this? Where do I go with that? She keeps on keeping on because of that patience of hope. Paul said, "I love the church at Thessalonica because of your work of faith, because of your labor of love, because of your patience of hope." And I love the church at Eastwood for the same reason. Here's what's really cool. Turn over to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 8. He begins this letter talking about patience, about faith, hope, and love, rather. And notice what he ends the letter talking about. In 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 8, he says, "But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and hope, and as a helmet the hope of salvation." What does he talk about at the beginning and the end? Faith, hope, and love. We call those bookends. And when you see bookends in Scripture, in between that, guess what you find out a lot about? Faith and hope and love. Those are the reasons why that I love the church at the church at Eastwood. The same reasons that Paul loved the church at Thessalonica. Bill Parcells, in his Hall of Fame speech, said, "Losers assemble in little groups and complain about the players and coaches in other little groups." He said, "Winners assemble as a team." That's what we want at the church in Eastwood, is to assemble as a team. I've told you a few of the reasons why that I love the church at Eastwood. I'm guessing y'all can think of a whole lot more. So what I would like for you to do with those little post-it notepads that are on the end of every pew is share them with the people on your pew and write 1, 2, 10, 15, however many you need. Write, "Why I love the church at Eastwood is because," and tell us. Maybe you love the church at Eastwood because of your child's Bible class teacher. Maybe you love the church at Eastwood because of your Faith in Action group. Maybe you love the church at Eastwood because going on mission trips together. Maybe you love it because of the fellowship that we have. Maybe you love it because the new preacher is not messed up too bad yet. I don't know. Whatever it is, write those down, and sometime between tonight and this morning, go downstairs and stick them on the wall in the fellowship room. And then tonight, when we're down there and y'all are pounding me, which again I hope is a good thing, but when you're pounding me, we can walk around together and you'll help me see why we should love this church. And you'll be reminded of all the reasons why that we should assemble as a team and love this church. And they're the reasons why, if you're visiting with us today, you'll want to come back and be with us again. Because I'm confident that the warm reception I've been given is the same kind of warm reception you'll be given. And you too will love this church. I know one who loves this church, and that's the Lord. He loves this church because, as His church universal, He gave His Son to die on a cross for it. He did so for your sins and for mine. And if you're here this morning and you want to respond to that love that the Lord has shown us through Jesus, you believe that Jesus is God's Son, you want to live for Him instead of self, you want to confess your faith before this number, you can be baptized or immersed to have your sins washed away. The Lord will add you to His church. You'll be a part of the best group of people that I know of. Not only in this congregation, but the church worldwide. Maybe you've done that, but you hadn't appreciated the relationship you have with the Lord. You've left undone things you should have been doing or done those things you should not. And you know you need to come back and ask Him to forgive you. If we can help you in any way, if we can pray with you or for you, if we can study with you, if you're subject to the Lord's invitation, please don't put it off. Come right now while we stand and while we sing.